Good evening. I'm Scott Binsack, and welcome to Sunday Night with me. Thank you for joining me. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing divorce and children, something I take very, very seriously. For children, divorce can be very painful, very stressful, very damaging. I should know. I was the product of a serious divorce from my own parents, and later on, went through my own divorce because I got married for the wrong reasons and brought children into the world. And then in a relationship thereafter, had another child, my daughter. I always talk about my childhood in my shows because it's a big part of how I became the way I am today, and thus the steps I took in my life. I don't think people realize how serious it is for children when their parents get divorced, or they're brought into a relationship where their parents aren't married and are into a relationship where there's the baby's daddy and the mommy, as people have brought it to today. Christ, today, sad to say, fathers don't even have names. It's just the baby's daddy. Horrible. Horrible. My parents, my father was from one side of the tracks, in Westbury, Long Island, and my mother was, so to speak, from the other, in the same town, but from two different worlds. My father was the oldest of 7. My mother, just her and her brother. My parents got married, and then by the time they were married roughly 9 years. They got divorced when I was 4 years old. They began the separation process when I was 4. And what I mean by people don't realize, I don't think people realize what children take everything in. Everything in. Even a newborn infant takes in its surroundings, what it hears, what it sees, even what it smells. So being in a stressful environment for a child is traumatic. Watching parents argue, fight, some even abusive with hitting. I watched my father, who was a cop in New York, actually became a detective at one point, used to hit my mother. And I remember seeing that as a child. And then the fights and the arguments. And as a child, you get caught in the middle because one parent is always to the other, even while they're still together. If one's doing something the other one doesn't want to know. I did a show earlier, a month ago, about the man in the moon. My mom's boyfriend used to tell me he was the man in the moon. So I wouldn't go home to my dad and mention who she had been seeing. And it was her true sweetheart from high school and whatever, but that's besides the point, not part of the show. The things you see and the things I saw were very, very traumatizing. Very traumatizing. And to watch a parent beat the other parent up or constantly argue, and it's difficult. If you think about all the stresses as an adult that we take in on a daily basis, think about take those stresses and put them on a child. Think about what that would do to a child of 3, 4, 5, 10, 12, 15, 16. All those stresses onto a child. You think we can't handle our stresses in a day. Think about a child and what they did and how they'll react to those stresses. You love to see it. Everybody wants a baby. I want a baby. I hear it all the time. Today, you better be prepared to bring that child into this world. Because if not, you the responsibility is tremendous, tremendous. And the worst part, my parents should have gotten divorced when they did because they didn't belong together. I agree with that. But what one parent does to the other parent, using the child, is horrible. And a lot of people do it. And I know people watching this are going to say the same thing. One parent usually uses the kid as a pawn, and I use that. Never use a child as a pawn. My parents' divorce was like War of the Roses, Kramer versus Kramer. I even had to testify at 8 years old on a stand because my father had a lot of money and got the best attorneys. All he was fighting about was custody and custody and custody and da 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 da. It was very hard for a father back in those days, and this was in the 70s, to get custody. And he got custody. And it was because of money and who he knew. And but through that whole process, I was pulled like a yo-yo. I'm telling you, I don't even remember how many schools. I know it's like 12 or whatever. It could be anywhere from a dozen to 15 different schools before ninth grade. And my mother being an alcoholic was even worse because she didn't have time for me in her life. So it was like you're thrown back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then one parent says something about the other one, and then they ask you questions about the other parent, and I know people do it. And I promised myself when I grew up that if I ever had children, I would never be like my parents. Well, I didn't do such a good job of that myself. My children are older now. My son is 18. My daughter's 16. And my first son, which I've discussed in other shows, I found out wasn't even my son. And that was the reason why I got married. She told me she was pregnant, and I'll never forget that. She told me she was pregnant. The first thought that came to my mind is, I don't think I could have gotten you pregnant. I've only known you 3 weeks. And I was very careful. But the good side of me, my conscience was like, let's do the right thing. And I wanted to make sure, if it was my child, that I did the right thing. So we got married. And a couple weeks later, I get a phone call from my ex-wife's girlfriend. She said, Scott, Kelly's down at the abortion clinic. She's going to abort your kid. I'm like, and in New York, it's a right of the mother. It's everywhere, I believe. It's the mother's right. The fathers have no say. It's pretty bad, but it's the mother's choice. I went down there and I convinced her not to. And a lot of it then, I remember my mom telling me, that kid's not yours. That kid's not yours. And in my gut, I knew the kid wasn't mine. But I was still trying to do the right thing. I don't know whether it was for her. Nah, it was for me. I thought by doing the right thing, I was doing something to maybe help myself because of my childhood and what I went through. And the things I found out about my father and my mother's ongoings. Shocking stuff. So I saved his life. His name is Scott. Years later, my ex used to say, come on, I want to get this particular guy over to do our landscaping, whatever, because I was a builder. And I needed a landscaper for my house, and I was looking for landscapers for homes we were building in the Hamptons. Little did I know, it was the same guy that was father to my what I believe was my first son. And this is how low, they can go. This man was in my house. He used to cut my grass, do everything. And she was with him. And that was also his kid. Unbelievable. Years later, she went and I was in a near-fatal auto accident in 1999. And from that auto accident, she told both my sons that I was dead, that I did not exist. I had to go through court processes, and that's when she finally told, because I asked for DNA test, that my oldest son wasn't mine. I breached off here a little bit to get into that, but I'm going to get back now to my parents. They used to be back and forth. What did your mother say? My father used to be, or your mother's this, or your mother's that, and badmouth my mother, and my mother would badmouth my father, and vice versa, and it would go back and forth and back and forth. And as a child, the child feels, and I know because I've been there, you feel like you have to choose sides. I don't want to choose sides between my parents. You love both of them, as would any child. And it's done every day. All for the adults, the parents' own selfish needs. And I know I've been there too. But one thing I refuse is that I would never tell my child bad things about their mother. Never did. Never did. To the contrary, she always did. And it's funny, you go to pick the kids up and you get them, and the stuff that comes out of a child's mouth. Children are so innocent, and they don't lie. They really, meaning when it comes to that kind of stuff and they just spit it out of their mouth, they're not lying. And the things that they say, well, mommy said this, or daddy said this, and da-da-da-da-da. Horrible. People, you have to understand something. What a parent does around their child is what the child is going to become and how the child's going to feel about themselves. And the child, during a divorce, or not even use the word because a lot of people don't even get married today and they just have kids, during the situation is traumatizing to the child. Constant bickering back and forth, arguing back and forth, or what mommy did this, or daddy did this, what did they say, what did this, blah, 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 or the fighting in front of them. It is traumatizing. You don't argue in front of your children. You don't use children as pawns. And my ex knew how much I loved my children. Even Scott, my first son, who I didn't know at that time, but even after I found out that he wasn't mine, still loved him like my own son. That was destroyed by her bringing his real father, which is fine. Everyone deserves to know their real father. But how she went about it and did it killed him. I mean, killed him inside. And of course, I was the bad guy. I was made out to be the bad guy. I don't know how I could be the bad guy. I didn't lie and deceive. And if she would have just been honest with me in the beginning that wasn't my child, I still would have helped her and taken care of the situation to help her. And I don't mean abort the child. I mean raise the child. And I remember as a kid watching my parents and the stories and the constant fighting and the abuse. And then, as a child, you act out. Children act out, or they become very depressed. And then you see their grades drop. They don't want to go to school, or the tantrums become horrible. Then everybody blames it. It's ADHD, or it's this. Prescribe them some medication, they'll be fine. Everybody prescribes medication for children today that are really just acting out, most of them, a lot of them, from the situations that they are in and or been brought up in. And it's the parents' fault. You can't blame a child. For years, I walked around with guilt as a child for the things that happened to me as a child, and it's not a child's fault. It's not a child's fault. No way. How do you, and even our court systems today are horrible on children, even when they're 15, 16, and they do something horrific. They blame it on the child and charge them as an adult. You should be charging the parents. And I feel very strongly about this because it's a parent's responsibility. Like I preach on this show, it's everyone's responsible because everything starts within us. We are all responsible for our future. We are all responsible for our actions. Every action has a reaction. So for a child, to raising children, we are just as responsible. And I promised my children when they were born, and I was in the room for all of them to be born, that I would do everything I could for them and not have them go through the things that I went through. Up until my boys were, Scotty was 7, I did do that. Sometimes not so good, but I think I did a pretty good job. It was after the divorce and after that things went awry. And I'm responsible as a father and for the actions that I did. And when you want to reach out to your children and the other party, whether it's male or female, the wife, the mother or the father, doesn't respond or allow you and thus use the children as a pawn, you can't see them if you don't do this. You can't see them if you don't do that. Who's suffering here? The child suffers. The child suffers for the adult's selfishness and the insecurities of the adult. They're not dolls. They're children. They are children. And a lot of people, oh, children are strong and they can take lots of things. Really? Really? Oh, they're strong. I've been through it. I'm strong too. Very. But as a child, I was confused, anxious, angry, bitter. Children act out. I hated school. I hated school. School was my thing. I used to, 265 days in the school year, or whatever they are. I caught most of them. School was boring to me as well, but that's a whole different story. And then they would move. And you were with one parent and the other parent. Then both of my parents didn't want me, and I ended up with an uncle, my godfather. That's a whole another trauma. It leads one thing. Every action has a reaction. You feel unwanted. You feel unloved. As parents, we need to communicate with our children, talk to them, be straight with them. And I've done a lot of research on this, as well as my life experience. And that's what I talk about on this show, is what I've learned through suffering and struggle and successes. Being real, as I say in adulthood, be real with your children. Don't talk bad about the other parent. It doesn't, that, how do you talk bad to your child about the other half and put the child in the middle? That's selfish, that's childish, immature, insecure. It shows everything. If anything, you should be boosting the other parent up to the child and making it as simple for the child through any transition, through divorce, through separation, through arguments, anything that they've seen. Ask them how they feel, even young. And yes, when the children are younger, it is proven through studies that it's easier on a child if the parents divorce or separate when they're younger, if the environment that the child is brought up there from, meaning the transition from not having both parents or to just seeing one parent on the weekends or vice versa. I used to so look forward to seeing, either parent, which one I was with, and then one wouldn't show up. That's another thing. Then the one wouldn't show up, and the child, if you get disappointed and you want to see your mother or your father, and then my father went and got remarried. The evil stepmother, so to speak. Yeah, she was an evil stepmother, all right, for sure, for sure. And there's a lot of good step parents that take and help children where the other parent isn't that good, and I have a lot of respect for them. In the case of my father, wasn't the case. Every environment that we create for our children is so important. And if you're in a bad marriage or in a bad relationship and you have children, don't stay in it. Everybody thinks it's better for the child. Children can sense when things are good and bad. They pick up on all the energy. They pick up on it, and that we become a product of that. I remember when I got divorced, or we were going to get divorced, and we got separated. I talked to my children, young as they were. I talked to them and explained to them, and not in a bad way. I just said, Daddy doesn't love Mommy anymore. And I always reassured my children that I love them. Those words, I love you, go a long, long way with children and with anybody, but especially with children. They need to feel loved and wanted by both parents. And if the other one isn't there because of some other reason, then it's tough. But the single parent has a big responsibility to even more so build that child up. And they have to play both roles a lot of times. Mother, father, father, mother. And it's difficult. I've been there too. I can remember the nights crying as a child because of my parents fighting. Up in the middle of the night, kid asleep. And what they did to one another through me, tragic in itself. If they just would have been straight with me as a child, it would have been much better. But instead, they just bashed each other, kept each other things to each other, so didn't explain everything to me as a child, and I had to figure it out the hard way and on my own. And I grew up very, very fast, not because of just this divorce, but because of other severe traumas in my childhood. And I'm no better than anybody else. We're all the same. I've just come to know what's right and what's wrong, and want to help others get that right with themselves. Children are precious. From the time that they're born to the time they leave your home, and even after that, they're always your children and they're precious. However, when they're adults, they should be treated like adults. Just like I don't believe children should be at home beyond the ages of 18 to tops 21. No way. Should be out on their own. I don't believe in spoiling children either. A lot of parents to do anything to get their children to shut up, stop crying, do this, give them things. Here, take this, take that, take that. And I don't mean giving your child a reward for doing something good. Like if you do well in school or this test, I'll do this for you. Or if you get good grades on this, then you can get this. That's very good and productive, positive. I mean, these children are acting up and their parents just, here, take this, be quiet, da, da, da. Or they beat the crap out of them. Even still to this day, they beat the crap out of them. Physical abuse. I got the belt when I was a kid and things like that. Do I believe in discipline? Sure. But beating the crap out of your kid? No. Never. Doesn't work. Child's going to be very angry. Playing your child as a pawn? Very, very angry. Child's going to be very angry. Or become depressed. Or become inverted. A lot of situations, people keep things to themselves. They don't talk. Which is, if you don't have communication with your children and believe that, let them be open and honest with you and not beat them up when they are, you're going to run into problems. Serious problems. You should be open with your children and want them to be open with you and to share anything with you. I'd rather my kid come and tell me, okay, whatever, I had sex for the first time, or I did this and that, or I'm going to do this, or I tried drugs, or I did that. I'd rather know and have them be honest with me than have them do it behind my back to keep it from me and then them have a serious problem. There's so many things you can do to help your children. The main one is to not be selfish and insecure and use them as pawns between the other parent. Talk to them. And don't bash the other parent. Lift the other parent up. I know that may be hard for the situations where you despise the other person, but don't take it out on the kid. Don't take it out on them. For your own, like my father, he had to have custody of me. It had nothing to do with me. It had to do with he had to win. He had to have custody. That's what it was about. And I don't like spoiled brats. My father was a spoiled brat out of 7. And he knows it. I don't like it. I'm not that way, and I would never be that way. I don't like that. I don't like mama's boys, so to speak. Don't like it. Because I saw all the things he's gone through in his life by being spoiled and having to want everything, and no way. No way. You have to find the neutral ground with your children, but it starts again with you. It all starts within us. And it was the hardest thing for me with my children. I have to go. It was my choice. I would go pick them up on the weekends, and I was living in Pennsylvania and New York at the time. So if we were up in Pennsylvania, I'd take a few-hour drive down, pick them up, bring them up for the weekend, bring them back. I did whatever it took. And on the other hand, she would play it as, well, you're not going to get them if you don't do this, if you don't do that, blah, 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 because she knew how much I loved them. And then she would fill their head with the same thing. Very selfish, not good. But she's also a product of her environment and was brought up in a very bad situation. You see how I've discussed on other shows, we are what we attract. It's very true. We all emanate energy. It's either, and you attract other people from who you are and what you emanate. And your children pick up on that same thing. They'll sense if one parent doesn't like the other parent, or they pick that up. You must be real with your children. And the back and forth, it's so traumatizing for a child. And you wonder why children have problems today. Serious problems. School, work, not wanting to get an education, sitting on the couch playing video games, inverted into themselves, drugs, alcohol, violence. It's not the child's fault. It's the parent's fault. And everybody hates to look in the mirror, as I've talked about many times on this show. And mate, I was one of those people at one time. Now I look in the mirror all the time. If I do something wrong, I'm going to tell you I did it wrong, and I'm going to admit it, and I'm going to learn from it. And I did a lot wrong with my children. And I'm going to share something now that most people don't know. Very, very few. It's because I'm real, and I tell it how it is. My daughter, who was from a second relationship I was in, after my ex-wife. We had a daughter. I was there for her birth. It was Thanksgiving, and she was born on Thanksgiving. And it was during a time that I actually had to, I was at the hospital. I went through everything, and then I had to go. I had to go. And I saw my daughter once after that. She'd come down to where I was living in Antigua in the Caribbean. And I was the first one to teach her how to swim. Or I shouldn't say that. Who brought her into salt water on the beach? I'll never forget that moment. I haven't seen my daughter since. And I've tried. And it has nothing to do with, I've been brought back to court. And it has nothing to do with the courts, because I won in the courts. I made a decision when I took her back to court years ago. And the decision was, the judge said, she's kept your daughter away from you for so long a time. And she lied to the child and told him that the father was somebody else. There's another man she was engaged to, since I guess married. And my daughter Megan grew up believing that someone else was her father. And because of that, the judge said, Mr. Binsack, we're going to have to slowly reunite you with your daughter through, therapy sessions and things like that. And it's not that I didn't disagree. I didn't agree with that. I thought back to myself at the time of all the things I went through as a child with my parents. During my parents' divorce, they made me see each lawyers on either side. They make the children go see psychologists and this and that. What parent would you rather be with? Which parent? And this, da 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 da. And they put you through all this drama for a child. It's BS to me what they do. And I had to go through all of that. And I remember what it did to me and how it affected me for years later. Being pulled back and forth, and then the therapist with my parents and this and that. I made a decision that day in court. And I said, after that, I had gone through all the stuff, and they said, okay, now we can start. I said, do I want my daughter to go through that? She believes somebody else is her father now. And she was 6 at the time. Do I want to put her through what I went through? And I made a decision to let her be where she was in the situation she was with the man that she believed was her father. I talk about regret on this show. And if I had to do that decision again, I think I would do the same thing. I did not want my child to go through that constant battling and the therapists and all this stuff to be after she basically been lied to. Not basically, she had been lied to by her mother and lied to. So a stranger comes into her life and says, I'm your dad. She's older now, and I've always made sure she was okay. I know where she is. And I'm hoping when she's 18 or even older, I don't know, that somehow I'll be reunited with her. But as a child, I did not want to do that to her. And I'll stick by that decision. I have to live with it every day. And I never forget it. So when people ask me, how many kids do you have? I tell them. But I don't really talk about my daughter because of this. And it's not that I'm hiding anything, because I don't have anything to hide at all. It was my decision. I will live with it. And I thought I was the better person for doing it, because if I was selfish like my father or my mother was, and the way parents can be, I would be affecting her life. And she'd have to go from a man she thought was her father to have another man in her life. And like, wow, how do you take away? Like, that's just very traumatizing to a child. And even the judge said it. And I agree. I don't disagree. And that's why I made the decision I did. It's still tough. It's still very, very tough. But I believe she's better off for it. I don't know, but I believe she is. She does very well. And she's very well loved. And if that's the way it was meant to be, then that's the way it's meant to be. Now, if I was selfish, I could have went in there and did what I did. And I didn't have to agree with what the judge did, and I didn't. What the judge said. And I didn't. And I've thought about this over and over again. And it would have been very traumatizing for her. And it probably would have affected her the rest of her, not probably, I know it would have affected her the rest of her life. Why interrupt her life where she's being cared for and loved, and she believes someone else is her father? The mother is who has to live with that every day, really, knowing, and he has to live with it, the father, knowing that that's not, and eventually she probably will find out, but she'll find out probably on her own. Somehow, some way, everything always works its way out. I found that out. The trauma that children suffer is because of the parents and their environment and or relatives. It's another issue. Relatives who are around your children and abuse them in any way, physically, mentally, sexually. A lot of parents turn a blind eye to that because it's a relative and they don't want to believe that. And they think the child is lying and not. Protect your children. Protect them. I wasn't protected. You must protect your children. And that again is also goes back to being open with them and talk to them and raise them that way from the beginning. Don't try to shelter your child from life to protect them for your own selfish needs. That's not going to help your child. In today's world especially, children need to know what the world is about, what life is about, what people are about, and they need to know the truth. You must be honest with your children, and thus honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, you're not going to be honest with your child. And it's like it's a revolving door. It's a revolving door. In other words, keeps going around in circles and circles and circles. And another problem. It's like the same. It's the same negativity and problems that the parent has is now instilled into the child. And then the child does the same bad behavior or the same type of problems with the depression and the anxiety and the anger. They are a product of their environments. Everything starts with you as a person and then thus as a parent. Love your children, be real with your children, and help them. And if you have children right now that are suffering or going through this or have been going through this, slowly start to be open with them and tell them the truth. And don't bash the other parent. I don't care what the other parent's done. It has nothing to do with the child. Nothing. The child does not need to know your feelings about the other person. What for? What good is the child going to do? And another big issue that parents do today, they become friends with their children instead of staying parents. Especially when they're children. As they get older, of course, you build a great bond with your child and you can become best friends with them at the same time that they're your child. But when they're children and they're going up even to the teenage, you need to be a parent first and the friend second. You be the friend so that they'll come and talk to you and be open with you. But you always must remain a parent. Don't be afraid to discipline your children. Don't be afraid to be honest with your children. Children become an inconvenience for a lot of people in their lives because they get in the way of their career or their lives or their nightlife, or their relationships. If you get in a relationship and the other person that has they have issues with your children and they don't get along with your children, get rid of them. Sorry to tell you. Your children come first, and the right person that's going to be in your life, your children will like and get along with. Yes, your children are going to go through the jealousy phase if you have somebody new in your life. That's normal. And again, be open and honest with them. But if you got a person in your life and your children just don't like them, children are very good judge of character. Remember that. They're very good judge of character. Very good judge of character. Do things with your children. Spend time with your children. That's another area. My father's way of taking care of me, and my mother's, here's your gift. Get this, take that. You want that? No problem. Here you go. I love you. Sure. How about you take me to a baseball game? How about you spend time with me and throw a football in the backyard? Or we play matchbox cars or whatever it might be at the time. The only thing my father did do with me that I loved the most was work with him. My father was a cop, but on the side he did construction. And my grandfather was a cabinet maker, and furniture builder. I loved to be in the shop with my father. I just loved it. I'm my grandfather. But my dad, that was a time I spent with my dad that I loved, and I still cherish those moments to this day. Those were the good things. And my mom more so, she spent more time with me as if it wasn't for my mom, I would have never learned about God, so to speak, and love, and being real. Because even though my mother had her issues, like we all do, my mom was a good person, a really good person, underneath it all. And she showed that to many. And I went through very, very difficult times with my mother. Very difficult times. And my mom died at 52, as I discussed this, from a massive heart attack. And I'm the only child. But on to my point, don't buy your children. Spend time with your children, real time with your children. Take them out, do things with them, talk to them. I mean, that's the best time to talk to them. Take them out, go places with them. Amusement parks, zoos, whatever, to the beach, anywhere. Even if it's a trip, simplest things, to the movies. I try to do everything I could with my children. Different things, different places. And if you don't have the money to do that, you could still spend a lot of time, good time with them at home. Different projects and different. Don't just stick them in front of the TV either. It's horrible today. Here, sit down, watch TV. Best thing for you. Yeah, okay. Sure. Okay, Mom and Dad. Thanks. Appreciate that. Can tell you love me by sticking me in front of SpongeBob for the next 4 hours, 5 hours. That's great. And it's tough today. Don't get me wrong. It's very tough. People working multiple jobs, single moms, single dads, working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. I understand, and I respect that. A lot of respect for that. Been there too. Point being, however, make as much time that you can with your child, but make it, even if you can only make it a small amount, make it good quality time. It's really not about the total amount of time you spend with your child. It's about the quality thereof. The quality is very important. And if you see that the other parent is doing something to interfere with your child's upbringing, meaning that they're in a bad environment at the other parents, or they're playing the child as a pawn, do something about it. Don't keep letting them do it. Step in, take control, and do something about it. There's lots of things you can do, even if you don't have the money. And you don't always have to take them back to court to do it. And I know, here's the issue with a lot of fathers, and even moms, is the child support. Today's laws, don't get me wrong, a lot of them are workless, to where the amount of money that they want a person to pay out of their income, and their income may not be close to what they need their own self to survive. I believe a parent should take care of their children, vice versa, both the mother and the father. However, you can't force somebody, as they do, to take 60% of their paycheck, 40%, 60%, whatever, depending upon what state you're in, and then expect them to be able to live and then do things even with their child. They can't take care of them, support themselves because they're paying such high child support, and the other parent gets away with it. And most of the time, the other parent's not even working because they're living off the child support. It's like become the way, welfare, child support, etc. To me, I think it's sickening. I'm old school. You work. And I know everybody says it's tough to find jobs today. And at points in time, yes, it is very tough. That's a whole other story and a whole other show. But you got to do what you have to do. And if your child support's too high, go back. Go back to court. Take the ball and do it. I'm a big believer in the system if you get your information straight and do it and go do it. In other words, you don't even need to be, you can do it yourself as your own lawyer. Do the research, do the homework on the child support laws locally where you are and do it. It's a simple form. Go down to the clerk of court, fill out the form and do it. Don't let the other party get away with it. If they're not, they have to be responsible. A lot of them don't have jobs. A lot of these fathers, baby daddies as they're called today. My baby's dad. Unbelievable. They don't have names anymore. Unbelievable. Let's just get pregnant. I want his baby. I want that. That's very sad. You're talking about bringing a human being into the world, not a doll. It's not just some thing. It's a human being. It's a child. And then that poor child, and I see it every day, and this happens to be in a location I'm in the area here in central Pennsylvania. 6 kids running at the time. One mother's 20 some odd years old with 6 children, 4 children, 3 children, 2 children. Some of them not even out of high school with babies. Walking, they're on welfare, they're this, they're that, they're too young to have children. There's 200 that can't even take care of themselves and be responsible for themselves, but guess what? Their mom was the same way. Understand? Keeps circling around. The definition of insanity, you know what that is? I'm sure a lot of people know this. Is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. You're going to get this. If you keep getting the same results for the same thing and it's bad, and you keep doing it, well, you need to look in the mirror. And this is the point. Your children are not pawns. Look in the mirror. Get it together. And stop being so selfish and worry about your children. The world does not owe us anything, any of us, anything. But you know what? We do owe our children something. We brought them into this world by our own doing, period. Thus, we are responsible and owe them something. And what we owe them is love. And what they owe is our time. And what they are owed is the truth. They are owed the truth about the situations that they are in and what to expect and what's to come and what's not to come. Don't take your insecurities and your issues and bring them in and put them on your children. That is the most selfish thing anybody can do. And I believe that's what I did with my daughter. I did not do that. The selfish side of me wanted to go and be the right parent, be the right one at the time. And I was much younger at the time. I was the one I would have been like, okay, I'm going to win this. Who's going to suffer though? My daughter would have suffered heavy. Heavy, heavy. I know she would. Someday I'll know if it was the right decision. But so far, she's not suffering because of it because she doesn't know I exist. I suffer with it because I know she exists and I'm not a part of her life. And I won't be there to see her, graduate high school or get married. Maybe I will be by then. Who knows? As I tell you and preach to you all the time here. Every day's a new day. new beginning. And you never give up. And you always move forward. Always, no matter what the circumstance, the situation is. And I have been in some very, very serious situations in my life. And as I am soon going to not only share some of them as I go along on this show, but I'm going to be telling my life story by a video book. Not a written book done, then told. I'm going to be telling my story just for my soul, my entire story, my autobiography, to help others. And there's much more detail even about this children's situation that I'm talking to you about, on both parts and what I suffered even as a child and what I see children go through today. And I think it's very sad. And then there's a lot of good parents. Please let me mention there's a lot of wonderful parents who I see, who I have the utmost respect for, who don't play each parent back and forth, who do the best that they can to raise their children, and they're very good at it. They're very, very good at it. And I have the utmost respect for them. And the single moms working multiple jobs to take care where there is no father, or the father doesn't care to do anything. But a lot of these single moms, and I will say, got themselves in that situation as well. Had to have that baby, or they weren't careful, having unprotected sex. They get pregnant, and then they expect the man to stay there. Most of the time, they're not gonna. And there's a lot of good fathers out there that I know that take care of their children incredibly as well and have the utmost respect for them. So when I speak to you, I'm not stereotyping. Please understand that, because I'm just talking about what I've seen and what I've suffered myself and what I've done and I'm guilty for with my own children. And if you're I lost a little track on this. If you're in a relationship or you're in a marriage and it doesn't work, it's better to be honest and open and tell it to your children and get out of the relationship. Two miserable parents together is horrible. Horrible for a child to be in. I know today it's convenient for financial means, etc. for a lot of people. That's great. But if you're going to do that, then don't forget about your children. And don't keep them not in the loop. Be honest with them and explain them the situation. They will respect you more for it later on. Trust me. And you're helping them to deal with it and cope with it. And that's all children really want, is the truth. And if you think about it, well, why, Mommy, don't you put a child in the middle? And I used to ask my parents, well, why? I still remember this as a child. My childhood is so clear in my head, it's amazing, because I went through a lot of shit. Excuse me, a lot of stuff. But, and it's clear. It's clear as day. And you look at the parents and you think to yourself, you're confused as a child. Do I go with my father? Do I go with my mother? My dad says this. My mother says this. Daddy's a bad guy. Mommy's a bad guy. Mommy does this. Mommy's not coming to get you this weekend because she's out doing this. A lot of bad relationships like that, situations where one parent is too busy with their own social life that they can't take care of their children, or they push their children aside. Or in business, and I've been the guilty one of the business part. Very. I'd never do it again. Never. Life's too short and precious, and children are too precious. And those times I did have with my children growing up, I will cherish them forever. And some of them are the most important, from Christmas mornings to their first walking to whatever. There's so many. Stay real with yourself and thus with your children. And if they're suffering now in school or acting out or having issues, talk to them. Talk to them. And listen to them. If they know you're there to listen, they will talk to you. And if you get that into their mindset and in their development early on, that's how it will always be. And you want your children to be that way. And you want them to understand life. Children will not understand or learn life without falling down and getting back up, like we all do. They need to. You can't keep them in a glass house. It won't work. Because then you have to go out into the world, and when you put them out, take them out of that glass house, pow! It's shattering. It's shattering. They must know what reality is, with the good and the bad. And as they grow up, you know the ages that you have to do it with them. Don't bicker, fight in front of your child. Don't do it. Be man enough, woman enough to not. Get your shit together. How's that sound? We all had to get our shit together at one point in our life. Because the children are the future. No, that's serious stuff when that's said. Quotes are everywhere. Children are the future. They're the next generation. They are. And it's kind of scary what you see today. And it's sad beyond anything. Forget the word scary. It's sad. Very, very, very sad. And I see children all the time around here, and I've been around the world as well. I've seen children, and this I'm going to get to this real quick. I've seen children living as poor in Central America and other countries of the world. They're poor. They hardly have one pair of shoes or tons of clothes or anything. But you know what they have? They have love, respect, morals, values, manners. And they don't have all of this. They don't even have the need. And yet they're poor, but they are raised incredibly. And they go to school and they have their one uniforms, and it's all uniform a lot of time outside the country when they go to school. Walking single file, all this stuff, and they're in some of them are in bare feet even going to school. But these children, and you talk to them, and I've talked to them, and I have friends that have children. It's amazing. And I had my boys in Central America when I lived down in Costa Rica. And that's where I taught them how to swim in the ocean. Not so much Long Island, even though we grew up on the ocean there. It was down there. They just happened to be at that age. And I'll never forget those times with my boys. And I still say my son Scott, even though he's not DNA and I don't see him anymore. He'll always be my son. But they had been in school down there and young, and great was they were learning a new dialect, new language as well, but they were around other children, and it was amazing being around these other children who were not as privileged or even had one mom or one dad, and total difference because of how they were brought up. I believe it's just very, very sad what's happened in our country and what's happening all over. Our next generation doesn't look too good. And that's not for the great children that are out there with the great parents. That's not what I mean. There's a lot of good out there as well. But there's more neglect and abuse and children being born every day. The babies, daddies, and mamas, that they have no clue even who the father is or who the dad has no idea. It's horrible. People keep letting it happen. You have to stand up as a person and then as a parent, if you're a parent, and take care of your children. But first you must take care of yourself. And that means looking in the mirror. And that means changing any of your habits that are not wanted. I've had to do it, and I look in the mirror every day now. It's a must. It is a must to look in the mirror every day. And just look into your children's eyes every day. You'll see what I mean. You'll understand what I'm saying to you if you look in your children's eyes every day. And then you go look in the mirror. They're the future. And they're innocent. They are innocent. And they are products of who we are. Love them well. Have a great night. God bless.